I'm Rob Teplitz. I'm an adjunct professor and director of the Institute, which celebrated its 25th anniversary last year. The Institute is also served by Professor Jill Family, who is the faculty advisor. The Law and Government Institute is one of Widener Law Commonwealth's signature programs. We focus on the complex intersection of legislation, regulation, public policy, and the law. The Institute has three main objectives. First, to help students earn specialized certificates at graduation in administrative and constitutional law, legislation, or environmental law. Second, to host public programs such as this one tonight that explore and debate important topics of government law. And third, to contribute to the development of government law through scholarly and employment opportunities. So as I said, this afternoon is our annual Jurist in Residence lecture. Just a few housekeeping issues. We are recording this program, and so your participation in the program is consent to being recorded. There is CLE credit available, 1 hour of substantive credit. If you haven't gotten the form yet on your way in, please get it on the way out. For those of you who are online, there will be a link dropped into the chat later in the program. And third, towards the end, we will have time for questions. I will monitor the chat for those who are online. Those who are in the audience, just raise your hand. To kick off the program, I will first call on Isa Dadal, a third-year student who will be graduating this May with certificates from the Institute. Isa serves as an officer of the Law and Government Student Society, which helps run the Institute. Isa.
Good afternoon, everyone. So as Professor Teplitz has stated, my name is Isa Dahtel, and I am the Secretary for the Law and Government Society here at Widener. But perhaps more importantly, I've been given the honor and the distinction of introducing the Widener Law Commonwealth's Jurist in Residence, Judge Caroline Michalczyk of the United States District Court for the Middle District of Pennsylvania. A graduate of Penn State Schreier Honors College and Tulane University School of Law, Judge Michalczyk experienced a comprehensive view of the law prior to her joining of the bench. During her time, she learned the operations of private law when she was first a partner at a law firm. She learned and understood the inner workings of the court system when she served as a law clerk. And she taught and continues to teach the importance of law and the intricacies about it, first as an adjunct professor and now as a jurist in residence. Throughout her career, she did everything that she could to serve her community, and those efforts did not go unrecognized. In recognition of her efforts in implementing numerous successful community projects, the Pennsylvania Bar Association awarded her in 2006 the Mikhail K. Smith Excellence Award in Service for her zeal and her passion for the career of law. The Lackawanna Bar Association granted her the Margaret P. Gavin Award for the Outstanding Young Lawyers. And in 2012, the Legal Intelligencer named Judge Michalczyk as one of only 35 Pennsylvania attorneys to be on the, quote, lawyers on the fast track. And on the fast track her honor was on, as she would even later be named as the Women Trailblazer by the Pennsylvania Bar Association Commission on the Women in the Profession. In 2013, her trailblaze continued when she received the call of duty by the judges at the United States District Court to serve as a United States Magistrate Judge. She accepted that call and served honorably for 10 years. And 3 of which she served as the Chief United States Magistrate Judge. Her trail, in fact, blazed so brightly that it inevitably caught the attention of the White House. And on July 11th of 2023, she would later be nominated to become a United States District Court judge by President Biden. Her hopes, our dreams, and the nomination would all be confirmed by the United States Senate on January 31st of 2024. May her service and care for the community continue to radiate and maintain the rule of law, just as you have done so prior. Please join me in welcoming my professor and our jurist in residence, the Honorable Judge Caroline Mahalchik.
Thank you. It's nothing like having a current student of yours introduce you to make you feel really great about yourself. Good evening or afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here as your jurist in residence here at Widener today and to talk to you about this important topic about the importance of the independent judiciary and the rule of law. And it's my pleasure, before we get started, to introduce the two individuals who have been so gracious in agreeing to come here today and join me in this conversation with you. First to my left is Senator Bob Casey. Senator Casey is an individual who has truly dedicated his life to public service. He is a native of Scranton, Pennsylvania, my hometown, and he's a graduate of the College of Holy Cross. He also obtained his law degree from Catholic University and spent 6 years in private practice before entering public service. Senator Casey served 2 terms as Pennsylvania's Auditor General, and then in 2004 was elected state treasurer and oversaw and safeguarded almost $100 billion in state funds and pension fund assets. He then ran for Senate and was elected senator for our Commonwealth and served 3 terms there, served 18 years in the United States Senate, and established himself as one of the leading advocates in Congress for children, workers, seniors, and people with disabilities. He has a track record of authoring and passing into law 99 pieces of legislation, and he has a unique and remarkable ability to work across party lines and focus on practical solutions that led to his successes as a senator throughout the Commonwealth and the country. He, more importantly to me, and our topic today, worked in those 18 years to confirm 50 federal judges in our district courts, in the district courts here in Pennsylvania, and 6 circuit courts, 6 circuit judges to the 3rd Circuit. And I just learned this statistic that Pennsylvania and Senator Casey has the most confirmations within a state with a split delegation. So there were 2 other states, I think you mentioned, California and Texas, that may have more confirmations in that time period, but they are not states with a split delegation. And so for the great majority of those 18 years, Pennsylvania was a split delegation. Senator Casey was instrumental in getting those judges confirmed, and because of him and his efforts, we have a full bench in the Middle District of Pennsylvania, and for that we thank you, because we are able to get our work done because of that. So thank you for that, and thank you for being here today with me. To Senator Casey's left is someone who probably needs no introduction to most of you here. It is your dean, Dean Cummings. Dean Cummings is new to Widener. He began his deanship here in 2024, last June. He is a graduate of Brigham Young University and the Howard University School of Law. Prior to coming to Widener, he was Associate Dean at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock William H. Bowen School of Law, and prior to that had been a professor of law at West Virginia University College of Law, along with being a visiting professor at numerous law schools throughout the country. He had also previously served as a judicial law clerk for Chief Judge Joseph Hatchett of the United States Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, and for Chief Justice Christine Durham of the Utah Supreme Court. So we are happy to have Dean Cummings here and welcome him to tonight's session as well. So both Dean Cummings and Senator Casey, thank you so much for being here with me tonight. We're going to talk today about the importance of the independent judiciary and its role in the rule of law in our country. And I want to note, before we get started into more of the substantive issues and the questions I have for Senator Casey and Dean Cummings, that this was a topic that I chose after talking to Professor Teplitz in, I think, November or December. And at the time, it was a topic that is important to me and I think important to all of us. But in recent weeks and months, it has become even more of an interesting topic, I think. And I did not know that was going to happen at the time, but I'm glad that we are talking about it today, because conversations like this are really important for understanding these issues. So to get started and as background, I just want to touch on, where is the federal judiciary coming from? What are we doing here? We are established in Article 3, Section 1, which says the judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior. That's how we're here. That's how we're established. When the framers were creating the, framing out the Constitution and considering, how to set up this new government, Hamilton had noted when he was describing the judiciary in Federalist 78 that there is no liberty if the power of judging be not separated from the legislative and executive powers. And he really outlined there and emphasized this idea of separation of powers, of checks and balances, that the judiciary, although he also referred to it as the weakest branch of government, was also really independent of those other two branches, and that was important to the rule of law. What is the rule of law? We talk about this all the time. I think it's an idea that's thrown around a lot. It's this enduring principle that everyone, persons, institutions, entities, are governed by. They are held accountable to laws that are just, publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. This independent judiciary is this critical part of our system of checks and balances. And the framers really created that fair and impartial judiciary that followed the law so that it wasn't biased, it was independent, it wasn't partisan, it shouldn't be intimidated. And it was really critical. This idea of judicial independence is critical to this idea of fairness and impartiality. I think there are two aspects of impartiality that we have to consider here. There's this decisional independence from outside pressures, and there's also the independence of a judicial branch as a whole. So whether you are a magistrate judge or a bankruptcy judge or an Article 3 judge, a Court of Appeals judge, a district judge, it's an independent judicial branch, but it's also your independent judicial officer and your independent decision-making process that's important. And finally, I just want to note before I turn to my first question for Senator Casey and Dean Cummings, that one of the reasons it's so important that we talk about this issue right now is that over the last several years, there has been, the public's faith and confidence in the judiciary, the public's ability to trust in what judges are doing, that we are making independent and correct decisions, has been decreasing at a really rapid rate. And that's seen in the tremendous increase, the alarming increase in verbal and physical attacks on state and federal judges throughout our nation. In the past 5 years alone, there have been more than 1,000 serious threats to federal judges. These usually come after someone gets a decision they don't like. And I want to note that these are serious threats that the Marshal Service have responded to. And I note that because what those 1,000 threats don't account for are the inappropriate communications, are the threats that are not deemed serious. These are 1,000 serious threats. And that's that's a real issue because judges have become more subjected to hostile, inaccurate, and intimidating verbal attacks online about rulings they make. And there is a process, and we can talk about that. There's a process if someone doesn't like a ruling I make, and it happens, and it has happened, and it will continue to happen. There is a method by which that ruling gets appealed, and there's a process that gets followed so that it gets appealed. What that ruling doesn't call for is an attack on the judge's person or their family or their friends or their independence. And those attacks really imperil the independence of the judiciary and make it hard for the judiciary to remain independent, both as an individual judge in their rulemaking authority and also as a branch as a whole. So with all of that being said in that background, I'm going to ask, and I'll start with you, Senator Casey, in your experience as a lawyer and as a senator and as a citizen of the Commonwealth and this country, what do you see as the judiciary's role in upholding the rule of law?
Judge, thanks very much. I'm, first of all, honored to be here and to be with you. And I was saying to the judge earlier that I think anyone who's gone through the confirmation process to be United States District Court judge or judge on one of our appellate courts, at least at this time in our history, should be the subject of some kind of commendation there's no real award yet that's been invented, but wow, what a long process. And I'm just grateful for your service, your public service, and your willingness to go through that long process, which takes far too long, and we weren't able to reduce that time for any judge, but I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. Well, thank you for standing by me through that. So,
Dean Cummings, I'm going to give you the hard part of this question because you're the one who has so much experience as a dean and law professor and student of the law and lawyer. But obviously, the role is of the judiciary is not just significant, but is in large measure is determinative as to whether or not we as a society will have rule of law, whether we're going to have the enforcement of law, whether we're going to have the full realization of separation of powers, or whether we have something else. And the judiciary, in the way that it dispenses justice, the way decisions are rendered, the determination that each judge makes in a particular case, contributes to the strength of our system of justice. I may have mentioned this to Judge Michalczyk months ago, or I may have said it actually at an investiture of one of our judges, but one of the things that separates us from any country in the world, and certainly what separates us from any new government is our justice system. In fact, I remember years ago talking to someone who was steeped in national security law and steeped in the workings of our military. And this individual who had major responsibility for parts of our national security was talking about Afghanistan, and this would be back in the period in 2009 and 10. And I missed part of his presentation, but saw him later in the day. I kind of grabbed him by the shoulders and said, I missed a lot of what you said, but what do you think is the most important concern that you have about where Afghanistan is right now? And he immediately said, their judiciary. He said, that's the biggest problem right now. And what he meant by that was not just that they didn't have the system we had or the judges in place, but they didn't have the system that undergirds that you do, that law enforcement, in terms of investigations and prosecutions, are done in a manner that's professional. That when a matter comes before a judge or a finder of fact, that system and that process is infused with integrity. So he was kind of encapsulating in some ways not just the challenges ahead for that particular government, in this case Afghanistan, but he was in a sense explaining to me the difference between our country and our system of justice in a lot of other places around the world. So the role that's played by federal judges in terms of their own personal independence, but as Judge Michalczyk just explained, the necessity for total independence of that branch of government is critically important, and that's been under great stress in the last decade. I think the kind of stress that we haven't seen in our history.
Senator Dean Cummings.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm really proud of Judge Michalczyk, our jurist in residence, and to be sitting next to Senator Casey. This is terrific, so thank you for being here. And on behalf of the community, welcome. I wanted to ground a comment in a Federalist paper, which I don't often do, but this is Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist 78, where he said our federal courts were, quote, designed to be an intermediate body between the people and their legislature in order to ensure that the people's representatives acted only within the authority given to Congress under the Constitution. So I want you to think about that. ensuring the independent judiciary ensures that our elected officials pass legislation that's within the authority given to them by the United States Constitution. And what that means is Judge Caroline Mahalchik must sit as an independent member of the judiciary when laws are challenged as unconstitutional, and independently make a determination as to whether representatives, state or federal, have exceeded their authority under the Constitution. That's what an independent judiciary does. That's what they're for. That's how we have a system of government that functions under the rule of law as described by Judge Mahalchik. And why is that important? I have lived in a number of states in my life. And in a couple of those states that I lived in, the state legislatures, it seemed to me, once the session opened, were in a race to pass unconstitutional laws. It was striking, the laws that were passed in some of those states that impinged on the freedom of speech, that impacted the freedom of religion. And any time those laws were passed, and I would often testify in front of these state bodies as to why they couldn't pass these laws as unconstitutional, my only hope was that our judiciary was going to be strong and independent and say that violates the First Amendment. That is an unconstitutional expression of your representation of the people. And in so doing, these judges that are the arbiters of the Constitution of what I believe is the greatest constitution and country in the world has to be protected by an independent judiciary. And that, I'm so grateful that Caroline Mahalchik is one of those, that Judge Schwab is here as one of those, that I believe will be strong and be independent and have the spine to say that's unconstitutional. And to me, that's what why an independent judiciary is important in upholding the rule of law that will allow us the freedoms that our Constitution promises.
Let me follow up on that and ask you, what do you see right now as threats to judicial independence?
Oh, Senator Casey, I'm going to give you the hard part of that question. But what I will say is, and Senator Casey may remember these days, but it used to be in the United States Senate that a judge would be deemed qualified, and the Senate would approve them 97-0 or 98-2. And very polarizing figures like Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were approved as qualified 97-0 or 98-1. And one of the threats that I think to an independent judiciary is if there are presidents on either side of the aisle that have a litmus test or that require a loyalty requirement in order to be nominated, that's a threat. Because our judiciary is supposed to be independent, and so long as they're qualified, regardless of who sits in the White House or who controls the Senate, are supposed to be approved by the United States Senate as qualified. And to Senator Casey's point about a commendation for going through the confirmation process, I know that our recent federal judge approved by the Senate, Kelly Neary, a graduate of our law school, and Judge Mahalchik went through bruising confirmation processes, to which when I was at lunch with Kelly Neary, she said, I don't know why. I'm pretty middle of the road. I don't know why I was so controversial in the confirmation process, and I view that as a threat. I think we should really try hard to get back to a date where we're looking at people's qualifications. Are you qualified to do the job? If you're qualified to do the job, there should not be litmus tests, loyalty requirements, or how would you hold on this particular issue that allows sort of this partisanship to sort of take over what I think should be an independent, qualified recommendation to sit as a federal judge. I believe that our federal judges come with good faith and hopefully good behavior as required to honestly make determinations based on what they feel like is constitutional or not. And I think we need to get back to an era where there's less fighting and battling and partisanship over who should sit.
So, Senator Casey, I'm going to shift the question a little bit for you to talk more specifically about your experience as a senator in those 18 years. How have you seen that process evolve, including a change in the requirements of what kind of votes you had to get? But, my process was not the same, as I want to recognize Judge Wilson, who's also here with us today. But no, she's not a Widener connection, as so. But Judge Wilson and Judge Schwab are both here, and Judge Bloom. Oh, and Judge Bloom is here too. But for instance, Judge Wilson's process was very different than my process, just in a few short years. And so and bruising is an understatement, Dean Cummings, I think. But how do you see that? How have you seen that process change in 18 years in your tenure as a senator? And what are your thoughts on how that's impacting? Is that a threat to the judiciary? Do you agree with what Dean Cummings is saying? How do we get back there?
I do agree that the process today is far too long, and it becomes to a large extent, it becomes a template or a place where politicians can often engage in political conflict based upon the nominee in front of them, and that becomes for some senators, I wouldn't say this about all, but for some, kind of just a sport. And that's, I think, ultimately undermines confidence, because if there's nothing wrong with aggressive cross-examination, as any lawyer would respect, any aggressive cross-examination of someone's qualifications, their experience, their character, there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes something they said 20 years ago, or something they wrote, one thing, often maybe two things, can become exaggerated and take on kind of a life of its own. So it's not simply that senators approach that process differently. Our culture has changed, and society has changed to the point where that kind of combat takes place. So I agree that process is different today than it was when I started, but I would say radically different than when I was growing up, where someone could be nominated in one particular month and could be confirmed only a few months later. Now it's nominated, and then by the time the confirmation process winds all the way around, it's a year and a half later, sometimes 2 years. We had examples where we had judges nominated, or nominees, judicial nominees nominated in one presidency, and then a new president comes in and you had to renominate them. I did that a couple times. So yes, I think that process is flawed. I'm not sure there's a readily identifiable solution or remedy for that problem, but because I do think it reflects politics more broadly. I will go back to because I think it's just on my mind these days. One of the principal threats, I think, to the independence of the judiciary, and therefore a threat to our entire system, is a view that the executive branch supersedes the other branches of government, or for sure supersedes the judicial branch of government. It's a theory that some people adhere to. It is dead wrong, because we don't just talk about branches of government. We talk about and have upheld as a people for all these generations co-equal branches of government. In fact, Senator Byrd, you spent some time in West Virginia. Senator Byrd one of the things you feared as a young senator, as I did, I served with Senator Byrd in 2007 and 8, and he passed away, I think if I remember now, 2009. But even at the end of his career, you did not want to be corrected by him, because in terms of your approach to speaking on the floor of the Senate or the Senate rules, he knew them backwards and forwards, and he wouldn't mind telling you when you were wrong. But one thing he also was very adamant about was that notion of co-equal branches of government. Here's the example he would use. If a young member of a new member of the House or Senate, or someone who was a veteran member of the House or the Senate, was asked the following question, how many presidents did you serve under? If you answered that question and said 2 or 3 or 4, Senator Byrd would correct you, and he'd say, you didn't serve under any of them. You served with them. Because the president, even though it's one person, is the representative of the executive branch. But he or she, someday we'll have a she, is co-equal to all the members of the legislative branch and all the members of the judicial branch. That's what co-equal means. The executive doesn't serve above the other 2 branches of government. And I worry, in terms of a real threat, that this notion, this theory, that somehow the executive branch is above or not co-equal to the judicial branch isn't just a bad theory, isn't just contrary to our I think our constitutional jurisprudence. It is a threat to our society, I think. And I think we need to combat that flawed theory with a lot of gusto.
I know when I talk to middle school students, sometimes high school students, and we're talking about checks and balances, I always describe it as a triangle, right? And there's that quote about, if men were angels, we wouldn't need government, but men aren't angels, so we do. And the beauty of that triangle is that you pull one corner of it, the other 2 can pull back. They can balance it. So it's this co-equal branch of government, because every branch is going to have ambition, but the other 2 can counteract that. So it is that idea, and that idea of the co-equal branches is so important to this concept of the independent judiciary and maintaining that rule of law. One of the things that we've seen a lot in the news, and whenever a judge is mentioned, it's Judge Mihalchik is a Biden appointee. She's a Biden judge. Or someone else is a Trump appointee. She's a Trump judge. And there's this perception, this process, the process by which someone becomes an Article III judge is a political process. There's no getting around that. That is, it's part of our systems of checks and balances. But the perception in the public then that this judge is, like Dean Cummings said, loyal to that one president or that one set of values is just wrong. The political process for the judge stops at the point of confirmation, but we continue to see that nomenclature associated with judges when they're discussed and when their rulings are discussed, and they're sometimes surprised. We've seen this a lot in the last few weeks. So they'll be surprised if a quote unquote Biden judge upholds an executive order right now. And then, the same surprise when a Trump judge or another judge appointed by a Republican president years ago strikes down or finds unconstitutional an executive order in recent years. And I guess for Dean Cummings, what are you seeing, or what have you seen in your years as a dean or a professor in law school? Have you seen a difference in students' perceptions of the judiciary and that role that they play that follows that tracks that?
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking around for any of my civil procedure students. I see one. That might not be good for you, Mr. Grove.
There are 12 law and government students here.
Yeah, so Judge Mihalchik will help me know who to call on. So Mr. Grove and I, in our class in civil procedure, read a case called Mallory, which came out of the United States Supreme Court a year ago. Really changed general jurisdiction in civil procedure. And yes, it is possible to get excited about civil procedure. What was interesting about the case was that the judges that voted 5 in the 5-4 discussion, and I don't know if you two would agree with me, but I often say the Supreme Court should just stay out of civil procedure because they 5-4, 4-4-1, 3-4-2, they just can't seem to ever figure out civil procedure. But in this particular case, if the judiciary voted the way that you would anticipate they would based on their presidential appointment, then we would have had a much different lineup in that case than what we actually had. So you had, quote, liberal judges joining, quote, conservative judges in this particular discussion. And that happens all the time. I think that one of the things that's changed since I appreciate Judge Michalczyk's question. In your long career, what have you seen change?
In your vast experience.
Thank you. Is that I feel like students have kind of tracked with the politics of the time. And to Senator Casey's point about how we've sort of changed the way that we view the judiciary. I think students expect a judge to vote a certain way if they were nominated by a particular president and get pretty up in arms if they don't. And I didn't see that when I started in the early 2000s as a professor. I saw students sort of trying to figure out what motivated a judge to come to his or her decision, and why and how we could sort of conceptually or theoretically come to a place where we understood what they were thinking rather than just being sort of, they didn't vote the way they should have because this is a political or partisan topic and they should have come in this particular instance. And I think, frankly, if I can speak freely, I hope I can, that Chief Justice John Roberts has surprised people consistently throughout his term, especially since, in the last few years with not voting how you would expect someone that was appointed by Bush to vote. So I think that's something that's really changed, is some sort of sense of expectation and maybe even anger if judges don't necessarily vote according to what they think they should based on who appointed them to be the judge. And my expectation would be, if you're a member of an independent judiciary, you're just interpreting the Constitution. Now, you may have a different view, originalism, non-originalism, what have you, but you would expect that there would be many instances, like we read in the Mallory case, where you don't expect the lineup of judges in the majority to be who they are if they're like sort of interpreting the Constitution in a way that they would bring independent thought and judgment to.
Thank you. And Senator Casey, following that, what have you seen? Have you seen a difference in the public's understanding of the role of the judiciary? Not just lawyers or the bar, but generally, in speaking with your constituents and members of the public, have you seen a difference over the last couple decades?
Well, I think sure. I think I think it's part of a larger dynamic where there's often hostility towards institutions, and that's not just government, but especially so in government. And I think the judiciary is no different, that it becomes the target of that hostility towards institutions. And this just happens to be an institution that dispenses justice, and it becomes part of a kind of a political fight. I will say this, though, what the dean made reference to I think is instructive, because we have seen judges who we believe fit a certain philosophy or orthodoxy who don't vote that way, either on the district court, the appellate courts, or even the Supreme Court. And I'm just in my own experience, as you mentioned, in my 18 years in the Senate, we had a total of 50 confirmations, most of them district court judges. There are times when I served with Senator Specter, Senator Toomey, and Senator Fetterman, but 12 of the 18 years were with Senator Toomey. We were different parties, different philosophies. So we had to work on confirmations. And that meant that I would come forward with a name when it was my turn. And I would say, why don't you consider this candidate? And Senator Toomey would have a period of time to consider that candidate. You come back to me and say, either I'm okay with that candidate, let's move forward together, sign this blue piece of paper, little your blue slip, and send it to the White House. Other times you'd come to me and say, for different reasons, I can't move forward, let's try someone else. And I was in the same position with him. Sometimes he'd send me someone that I reviewed and I couldn't agree to, and most of the time I did. But that give and take was important. It was also important to keep our mouth shut when we sent a name to the White House, because you can do someone a lot of damage if people know that they're at the White House and then they're not considered, or not considered and then not confirmed. So you have to keep your mouth shut. You have to respect the process, and you have to engage in it honestly and with integrity. And we did that, and that's why we were able to confirm that number of judges, a record for a split delegation. But that led to instances where I signed the blue slip for, and when you sign the blue slip, you're basically indicating you're highly likely, if not definitely, going to vote for that person. So it's not just a process question. And there are times when I would sign that blue slip thinking, geez, I don't know about this one. and then they would serve not only faithfully, but they would surprise you on some of the decisions they rendered. I have one specific example. It's a long story, I won't tell you, but about one person who exercised the kind of judicial independence under fire, which should be highlighted. That this person is someone that I did not vote for, but they proved that they were going to be someone who's going to be independent. And I doubted their independence when I voted against them. So that's for another day. But it's critically important that we recognize that just because someone has a philosophy or even what borders on ideology, it isn't outcome determinative in terms of how they will rule over time. And the good news about our system is we get surprised in positive ways often.
So, Dean Cummings, what do you see as the role of law school in supporting an independent judiciary, if any?
So grateful for that question. What we're doing right here now, tonight, is the role of the law school. We need to be hosting senators and judges and talking about this subject matter. That's one of the roles of a law school, is to have independent, important conversations about these things that really matter. So this is evidence of the role of a law school right here tonight. We also play an important role in educating who are going to be the leaders, the senators, the judges, the attorneys of tomorrow. And it's really important in our classrooms for us to be rigorous in our education. It's important for us to model the importance of an independent judiciary in the way that we talk about the cases and in the way that we talk about the outcomes of the cases. And I think that more than anything else, I think it's important for us as a law school to be an open place where everyone belongs. We want everybody here. We want people from rural Pennsylvania. We want people from urban Pennsylvania. We want people of all stripes to come in and learn the law. And we're not always going to ideologically agree. One of the great things about the country is that we can hopefully agree to disagree and still walk out friends after a conversation. And I think that's something that we should model as a law school. So I think we have a very important role to play in not just educating those that will become independent jurists, but in modeling the way that we should have these hard conversations and be able to walk away with an understanding that we may not agree politically, but we can certainly shake hands and have a drink together and have a conversation. So the law school to me represents sort of the, I don't know, birthplace is too strong, but sort of the anchoring place for an independent judiciary by the way we educate, the way we train, and by the way we send our people out to be really good, independent thinkers and jurists.
Dean. And Senator, I mean, the follow-up to that is once they're out of law school, what can lawyers do to promote an independent judiciary? And if you have thoughts on what the judiciary can do as well, recognizing we have a lot of limits on what we can do, lawyers and judges, what can we do to help this?
Well, obviously, I hope judges, or hope not judges, but law students will consider public service when you're through law school, and I guess I should add, when you're done paying off your loans, probably better to pay them off first before running for public office or doing something like that. But I think, look, the law is not just a foundational to and critically important training to be a judge at any level of our system, but it's also great training and background if you want to be an elected public official. I know that from personal experience. But I think in terms of the role that that person who has gone through law school and becomes a lawyer, maybe doesn't choose to go into the judiciary or to go into elected or appointed office, serves as a lawyer and an advocate for their entire career. They play a role as well in terms of upholding the independence of the judiciary, in terms of how they behave and function as a lawyer. If you have lawyers that are constantly disrespecting a judge or disrespecting the system, that obviously erodes confidence or undermines judicial independence. And it's really tough when your side loses. But whether you're a judge or a politician or a citizen, no matter what station you are in life, you got to respect the result of a court. You can appeal, but at some point there's a final order that's unappealable. You got to respect that. You might be really damn mad. You might not think it's politically the right thing, but you have to accord that decision respect and do your job as a citizen, or as an official, or as a lawyer. And there are some people out there that are questioning that now, that somehow we can just disregard that decision and do whatever the hell we want. And that's a recipe for instability and anarchy, that the likes of which we've never had to contemplate. But I think lawyers play a critical role, and obviously the rules of professional conduct govern the work of a lawyer. But I think it's not just adherence to the rules; it's your attitude, your demeanor. I think is critically important, of critical importance. That old lesson about a conflict. Someone says there's a conflict here that's clear, or there also might be the appearance of a conflict. I think in some ways has an application to the role that a lawyer plays. It's one thing to show respect for the judiciary, show respect for the rule of law, but that's kind of the lowest bar. I think lawyers have to exceed that. And if there's an appearance that you don't respect the law, or if you're engaged in kind of denigration of the law or denigration of the system, then I don't think you're meeting your obligations as a lawyer. So lawyers as advocates, and the professional rules also obviously preach and even codify zealous advocacy. That means you can be one hell of an advocate for your client, as you must be. But at some point, you've got to respect the rule of law, and the appearance of your conduct sends messages to other citizens. If you have a lot of lawyers engaged in disrespect for the law, that begins to aggregate or accumulate, and then you have citizens who may not be paying a lot of attention at a particular time. Might say, well, maybe the system really is as bad as that lawyer seems to indicate. So I think lawyers play a significant role in this.
I agree. I was reflecting on how, and I think I have one more remark, and then I think it's time for questions if we have any. So I was thinking about those of you who were here when I administered the oath of professionalism in August to the incoming 1Ls. I don't know if there are any 1Ls here who've survived their, oh, yay. So you were here when so you're going to hear a little bit of what I said then. But I just spoke to the 1Ls, and I told them that, part of what they were doing and part of their duties of professionalism is really to defend the legal system and the judicial system against unfair attacks that undermine the public's faith in our democracy, because there is a duty as a lawyer to challenge legal rulings. There's not a judge anywhere who's going to say, don't take an appeal of me. You have a duty and an obligation to seek that correct outcome for your client. And that's what our appellate courts are for. It's what our system is built for. But it's resisting that urge to characterize a ruling, to characterize opposing counsel's position in a manner that ridicules or demeans or attacks an individual judge or attorney, that really chips away at your profession and your chosen role here, and the legal system's integrity and legitimacy. That's going beyond the zealous advocacy, right? That's going beyond what your job is to do, and it's not professional. And so I think for lawyers, reminding themselves that, how you comport yourself with your clients, how you explain things, how you present and discuss the judiciary is something that's important for you to remember to do, because that is going to be what supports the idea of an independent judiciary from the bar's perspective. So it's about 10 of, I think. So do we have questions? Questions in the audience from any of you?
So first, we do have a comment from Peter Marks. Hi, Peter, who's joining us online, who points out, going to one of the earlier points that was made, that Chief Justice Earl Warren, who had been the Republican governor of California, is a historic example of, quote, not voting as politically expected. We appreciate you pointing that out, Peter, and reminding us of that. Any questions from anyone in the room? Isa.
So thank you all again for the discussion. I found it very informative. The first question I do have sort of goes back to the last point that we were on, where, both sides, when they lose, they get angry with the court system. But is there a way with today's courts where they can essentially create a scenario, like sort of like in Marbury v. Madison, where they give a small victory to the one side, and then on the other half of their ruling, something that they wouldn't like, but it forces the other side to comply with it simply because they keep their victory? I don't know if that made sense or not, but...
That everybody wins?
Sort of, yeah. Because I remember in Marbury v. Madison, like Thomas Jefferson got his win, but for the courts to, maintain their power, Jefferson had to play ball. Otherwise, he wouldn't get what he wanted he wanted the courts to do.
I mean, I think that kind of control, if a litigant wants to have that kind of control, then the answer is a settlement and a compromise. I don't think there's any guarantee that you're going to go to court and get a ruling. And I don't think courts are, I don't think courts are going to be in a position to say, how can I make both sides happy here? Because that's not our job. Our job is to say, what is the question of law? What are the facts that we have in front of us? And how does the law apply to that? And what's the correct outcome? Someone's going to be unhappy. So if that's what the litigants are after, then I suggest they go see my colleague, Judge Schwab, about a settlement conference, and she'll bring them to a middle ground. I don't know if you guys have anything else to comment on that. But
I just had a quick thought. And I really, really did appreciate Judge Mahalchik's introduction of me, but I've also decided that from now on, Isa is going to be my introducer. Anytime I go anywhere, I'm going to take Isa with you.
Dean, me too. That's going to be me too.
That'll be your next career, Isa, is Judge Mahalchik and Dean Cummings, introducer. So I just wanted to point out quickly, that we did have a potential crisis in our country, and when the brilliant, in my view, Brown versus Board of Education strategy was engaged by Howard Law alum Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, the Brown versus Board of Education decision, one of the most important in our nation's history, did away with separate but equal and Dred Scott and all of the nasty inequality that the judiciary had supported previously. And Southern governors said, we're not complying with Brown versus Board of Education. And having just come from Arkansas, Little Rock, where Central High School is, and the Little Rock 9, a Republican president supported a Supreme Court led by Earl Warren and sent troops down to support that judicial judgment. And can you imagine what our country, where our country could be if Dwight D. Eisenhower didn't send troops down to make sure that 9 high school young black children were not escorted into Central High? Thank you for the accompaniment. So one of the things that I think is really important to recognize is that we've had instances historically where the judiciary and the importance of a Supreme Court decision could have been impugned and our rule of law destroyed. And we had presidents that may or may not know Eisenhower's position, but may or may not have agreed with the decision, but sent troops down to enforce it, to make sure that our judicial opinions were respected. And those governors that stood in front of the schoolhouse doors and said never were swept away by the military that brought those 9 black children into a high school to integrate it as ordered by the United States Supreme Court. So I think it's really important to Issa's question and to the question online to recognize that there have been important instances where our judiciary made bold decisions and our executive supported those decisions, sometimes by sending the National Guard to ensure that those decisions were respected. And I think that's really important to remember.
Any other questions in the audience? We do have a couple of online, but let me go. Oh, yeah. Excuse me.
Thank you for being here today. It's a great presentation. Just one question specific to, people talk about the legislature and say like, hey, the answer to a lot of these problems might be term limits. Article 3 with regards to judiciary seems to obviously say there's not some kind of term limit for the judiciary. But what would be your response to that? And I preface this that I would not be in support of that, but what would be your thoughts on that relative to people who would say, well, the answer to maybe declining confidence in the judiciary would be term limits?
Go ahead.
As someone who served 3 terms in the United States Senate, I obviously didn't uphold the idea of term limits being a good idea. But I guess the way I would, from my perspective, and people that agree with me, I would argue that the term limit is the term of office, and the people decide whether you get another term or not. In my case, I got 3 terms, and then the 4th time I didn't. On the other side, they would argue, well, if you have if you have term limits, you have people who aren't there too long and don't become too comfortable and too entrenched, and they'll be more responsive to the people. I can understand part of that argument. I do think, though, that there is a value in terms of the experience a legislator can build up over time that's significant. There's a value to that, whether it's seniority or experience or a combination of the two. Can't quantify it, but there's a value, I think, to the constituents that comes with that. The corollary to that, I think, is the idea that too much turnover leads to kind of an uncertainty about representation that I think people would be concerned about if we had a constant turnover of legislators. But I understand the impetus behind people wanting term limits for legislators, because we have term limits for the executive branch. Why not? But I think the process is, I think legislators are pretty responsive to the people they represent now because they have elections right in front of them. I would recommend, this is never going to happen, but I recommend that members of the House get at least 4 years because this 2-year cycle, most members of Congress who are endangered spend most of their time raising money for the next election. And that constant election cycle, I don't think that does anybody any good, but probably not going to prevail in that view.
I'll just add quickly that this idea of a lifetime appointment for a federal judge, I think, is supported by the idea that if you are not worried about your job being taken away, allows you to have that spine to make hard decisions. And so the idea of a term limit for a federal judge would, I think, sort of dampen the idea that an independent judiciary can take hard calls like the Brown versus Board of Education judges did and not worry that they're going to get voted out of office. Because remember, Alexander Hamilton said, the role of the judiciary is to make sure the representatives aren't going outside their lanes as far as the Constitution is concerned. And so that would probably support the idea of a no term limits for federal judges.
I have beyond the 9, but the number of Supreme Court justices varied over the years. The jurisdiction of the district and circuit courts varied over the years. And frankly, I'm not sure I see any difference between a lifetime appointment and a 15-year appointment. I mean, if you know you're going to be there for 15 years and then you're done, it shouldn't have any. It's the same as it's the same as a lifetime appointment. You know you're going to be done, so you shouldn't be afraid. It's not like you're running for retention, so you shouldn't be afraid to do that. And I'm probably older than a lot of people here, but I don't remember when Earl Warren was appointed to the court. But certainly he was confirmed. He was a recess appointment, and he was confirmed in like 2 weeks. And I remember, the days of, I think things started to slide downhill during the Nixon administration with, or actually even before that, when the Senate wouldn't confirm a force for ethical violations. It's certainly, I think, anybody would say pale to what might be going on at the court now. But then when President Nixon nominated Clement Haynsworth and G. Harold Carswell, they were both shot down by the Senate for various, Nixon said it was because they were Southerners, but nonetheless, and then I think, we've seen it slowly degrade ever since Robert Bork. And then the other thing, I think, there was an interesting article a while ago in the New York Times called The Drifters, and it talked about how all the quote-unquote conservative judges that were appointed to the Supreme Court over time had drifted to the left. You saw that with Earl Warren, who was certainly a law and order attorney general in California, a law and order governor, and you saw that with Justice Brennan, was another appointed by a Republican president who ended up one of the most liberal justices ever. And I think, the conservatives organized very well and have managed to sort of neutralize that drift through the Federalist Society, where there's, it's almost like a training program, so to speak. I think you have people who are being nominated who are much more entrenched than they were. And the politics of it has entirely changed. So I think it might be a good idea to take a hard look at term limits because it's different saying somebody's got a 10 or 15 year term versus somebody that gets appointed until probably after you're dead. So.
Terry, and that your remarks on that. I think that we are past 5 o'clock now, so I'm going to ask Professor Tebel. Oh, it's okay, that's fine. But Senator Casey, Dean Cummings, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to Judge Michalczyk, Senator Casey, and Dean Cummings for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be with us today to talk about this very timely topic, and also for your public service. Point of personal privilege, I'll speak for Judge Schwab. Maybe it's a little risky. I don't know. We'll find out. But Judge Schwab and I started our careers in public service thanks to you, Senator Casey, and we very much appreciate that, beyond what we, I think, can probably articulate. Thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon and for your support of the Law and Government Institute. Our next event will be the annual John Geddes Lecture on April 3rd at 4:30 p.m. featuring Professor Ronald Levin of the Washington University in St. Louis Law School. Another timely topic, he'll be speaking about the recent Loper-Bright case, a significant decision in administrative law from last year's U.S. Supreme Court term. If you've not already received information about how to register for the Geddes Lecture, please let me know. We look forward to seeing you then or at another Widener Law Commonwealth event soon. Have a great evening.